embarrassed about, because Doris does have a very big nose. And when he pointed out,
did a
your
little
nose is
thing about
bigger.
noses. Yes, that was very strange. And of course, we've got Francine on the line today. She's going to be watching the Dodger game. Have you spotted your son at the games? I mean, I always looking for him, but
Yeah, you know, he and
Tracy, I think, only watches Dodger games so she can try to spot Robert.
Yeah, well,
is he there? You see him?
Not every single one. It's really hard to find him sometimes because they're not showing the hitting coaches that much, to be honest. So
no, I mean, I get it, but there's not that many people. But I just, you probably can recognize him with it. I'm sure he's got a mask on.
Yeah, he has the biggest mask on, and I think he's a little bit phobic. I mean, when the pandemic came down, I know that he was like, he actually said, he goes, "This is gonna affect things a long time," and he was just really, really, he got it, I think, and so he's, I think, very, very careful.
Wait, he got it? He got it?
Or he understood?
No.
Okay.
No.
Listen, I mean, my I don't know if people know this, but my brother Adam got it. So I mean, it's affected our own family, but I mean, he had it for literally 3 or 4 days, and he was, like a lot of young people, he was right back, right back to work and doing stuff, and wasn't really affected by it. We took us a long time before we felt comfortable seeing him, but no, we've
My son Brian had it too. The pilot.
But on a better note, Francine, are we going to win tonight?
Everybody's asking me if we're going to win tonight. I hope so. I really, really hope so. I have a very hard time sitting through some of these games because...
Well, I didn't watch it Sunday. I couldn't handle it.
Huh?
I couldn't handle watching it on
It's
Sunday.
hard to watch, but you know what? They've won where they've won several games in a row, and I just hope that's what happens tonight. So
yeah. Well,
I did see a picture recently that his wife sent through Instagram, I think it was, and Bob got it, and it was a really neat picture. And Robert looks so happy. It's a picture of him with all the main big players, the big hitters in a cage. And it was a neat picture, and unfortunately I don't think we can. I wanted to get a copy of it, but I don't know.
Well, I won't blame Robert if the Dodgers lose tonight, because I'm not real happy with who they're starting as a pitcher tonight. But
who's the pitcher tonight?
Gonsolin. So I'm not real happy with that. But it will not be Robert's fault. We won't hold him accountable. And again, for those who don't know, Francine's son Robert is the batting coach, the head batting coach for the Dodgers. And what is he, 33?
He's 30. He's turning 34 next month.
33. So he got hired when he was 32.
Yeah, and the thing is that the other coach, Brent Brown, Robert I used to drive, terrible mother. I used to drive him all the way up to Bakersfield, to the end of Bakersfield, so he could practice hitting with Brent Brown. And now today, Brent Brown and he are, as they said, Batman and Batman. He's the other hitting, he's a strategist, or I can't say that word right, that they coach together. And Robert's style is more like this Craig Wallenbrock, and then Brent Brown has more his style, but they're very much aware of the two different styles, and so I think they're able to work very well together. So, yeah, I'm excited.
All right. Well, you have a lot of, as you know, we have a lot of Dodger fans on the line right now. We're going to move into the Talmud and to the Midrash in a second, but of course we've got Jeff Stein sitting there in his
yeah, I guess since the Giants aren't playing, I'll root for the Dodgers tonight.
Oh, stop it. We've got Jeff Stein in his Hebrew Dodger shirt on in Colorado, in Rocky country, and he's now in hostile territory, and he's not afraid to wear his Dodgers But of course, no one can figure that out in Colorado. They don't know it's a Dodger shirt. Maybe that's why he's wearing it. I can't hear you, Jeff. You're muted.
I have my 294 flag in the front.
Oh, nice. Nice. So you're not hiding. You're not hiding.
Oh, no. My allegiance.
You're not hiding your allegiance. Well,
right.
Well, I guess that might be a good transition into our Midrash today, because we're reading about Job, and of course the long-suffering Job. It's been, gosh, I just realized something. Poor Robert Van Scoyoc has never actually seen it. Well, I guess he was 1 year. He was 1 year old when the Dodgers were last in the world, won a World Series. Sorry, when they last Dodger fans last rioted. He was a 1 year old baby. Francine,
he was. You know, they have on there 86. He was born in 86.
Yeah, so he was 1.5 or whatever, almost 2. So, yeah, he doesn't remember it. So, and of course now he's the batting coach. But we are going to hopefully this year our suffering will come to an end. But so this is Job, and the weird thing, of course, is that we're reading Job in Genesis, which why are we reading Job in Genesis? Job is in a whole different part of the Bible. Yes, that is true, but the way the rabbis figured it, Job lived at the same time as the patriarchs, or at least some of the patriarchs. We don't know when Job lives. In the Bible, it literally just tells us where he lives, the area that he lives, which by the way, we're not even 100% sure where that is, but we assume that it's in modern day Jordan or Saudi Arabia, on the other side of the Jordan River. And we don't know when. Now, why even we have this tradition of him living then is because there is a person mentioned as a descendant of Esau whose name is Yovav. And so there's a theory that this is the same guy as Job, that Job is a short version of the name Yovav, and that's where we read about him, because the Bible doesn't introduce him with anything. And so there's this kind of like, the rabbis kind of take that as, because we know about him somewhere else. It's possible. It's also possible that he lives in a completely different time period, but we don't know. And so the rabbinic tradition is, they're actually, I shouldn't say the rabbinic tradition, because there's different rabbinic traditions about when Job lives. And actually some traditions that try to like bring them all together, that he lives a really, really, really long time. But the idea that he was at the time of the patriarchs kind of allows for this understanding that he lived at a time when there weren't a lot of Israelites, there weren't a lot of Jews. And so it is, on one hand, all the more amazing that he does what he does and he behaves the way he does. Or also maybe there aren't a lot of other people that were living like him at all, because there weren't a lot of Jews. And so that's also maybe what's at stake here with Job. So we're going to take a look at Job today, and we don't have Rosemary with us. I'm trying to get us up on Facebook, and I'm not having success this morning getting us up on Facebook. Rosemary is in the hospital right now. She's recovering very nicely, I will say. I saw her yesterday at the hospital. She's at UCLA, and she is recovering well from some heart surgery. And fortunately, again, it's very serious. You don't say heart surgery without recognizing how serious it is. But she is recovering really well, and hopefully will be home in a couple of days. And so she was going to try to listen in, maybe on Facebook if I can get it up and running. But she is in a hospital bed right now, and technically she's, at least as of yesterday, she's still in ICU. But very soon to come out of ICU. And yeah, I'm still not able to get on Facebook. So apologies to those that would get on Facebook. So we're hoping that if she's not online with us next week, that she'll be online soon. And because of that, I'd like to ask Judith to read today, if you wouldn't mind, Judith, to help us do this. And I just went live. I figured it out. I couldn't be denied the ability to go live. I went in through Chromebook, and I think Google Chrome, whatever. All right, so let's take a look at the Midrash on Job. Again, some people might know a little bit about Job, that he suffers and that kind of thing. But for those who don't remember very well or haven't read it in a long time, you're going to see it through the lens of the rabbis right now. So Judith, take it away.
Job and the patriarchs. Job, the most pious Gentile that ever lived, one of the few to bear the title of honor, the servant of God, was of double kin to Jacob. He was a grandson of Jacob's brother Esau, and at the same time, the son-in-law of Jacob himself, for he had married Dinah as his second wife. He was entirely...
Yeah, keep going. We'll come back to that.
He was entirely worthy of being a member of the patriarch's family, for he was perfectly upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. Had he not wavered in his resignation to the divine will during the great trial to which he was subjected and murmured against God, the distinction would have been conferred upon him of having his name joined to the name of God in prayer, and men would have called upon the God of Job as they now call upon the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he was not found steadfast like the three fathers, and he forfeited the honor God had intended for him.
Yep. And let's just show real quickly what we're talking about here. If you look at Genesis chapter 36, which gives the lineage of the sons of Esau, the descendants of Esau, if you look, it says, when we have a list of the rulers of the chiefs of the tribe of Esau, the Edomites, it says, when Bela died, Yobab, the son of Zerach from Bozrah, succeeded him as king. And when Yobab died, Husham. That's the reference that the rabbis feel might be to Job. So if he's a descendant of Esau, then he's connected to us through Isaac, right? He's related that way. The rabbis say there's another tradition that he also marries Dinah as his second wife. Why does he have a second wife? Because he has a whole nother set of kids. He gets a restart, if you will. People forget that in the story of Job, everything gets taken away from him, including his children. His children get killed, which is kind of like the last straw for him. But when they die, that's, the last thing that gets taken from him. Actually, his physical health is the last straw, if you will. But it's a strange story, obviously, for a lot of reasons. But the takeaway from the fact that he gets everything taken away from him is that at the very end of the story, he gets everything returned and twofold. This allows the rabbis to say that he has a new start, and the wife that he has a new start with is Dinah, is Jacob's daughter, the only daughter that we learn of by name. I mean, maybe the only daughter, we don't know, but it's the only one we learn the name of. So therefore he actually has two connections to the Jewish people through Isaac and also through his wife Dinah. And he's such a great guy that he almost would have gotten his name with the big three, that we would have used his name with in the Amidah, for example, even though he wasn't he wasn't technically Jewish. So they really are saying, on one hand, he's a very special guy, but there's something about him that wasn't good enough. And that is the fact that he does eventually, he eventually gives up. And for that, we don't include him. So there is a recognition that he's really, really special. Maybe again, like the greatest Gentile who ever lived, but something was still missing.
But the other forefathers disagreed with God frequently.
Yeah, but they didn't give up. When Job finally gives up and basically says, I cursed the day I was born, and he gives up. Again, to refresh people's memory on what happens with Job, there's an opening, there's a prologue, and then there's an epilogue, which some people say weren't written by the same guy that wrote them. I say guy, the same person that wrote the inside part, which is the real meat of the book. The weird thing is we're about to read the Midrash on Job, and it really focuses on the beginning and the end of the story, the narrative. The philosophical parts of Job, which is 90% of the book, is where Job goes through the battle for why are bad things happening to him, and of course the story, or the way the philosophical ideas are presented, is that he has friends that come to him and basically tell him, well, you must have done something wrong, just repent for what you did wrong. And then finally there's one friend, Elihu, who basically is the friend who kind of nudges him and says, the other people aren't speaking the truth. What really is the truth? And then finally Job, rather than like say, hey, it's up to you, God, Job just says, I'm done. I don't care anymore. Just kill me and I'm done. I give up. And that's when God answers Job finally and says, and this is, by the way, the 2-second version of Job. He says to Job, the answer that Job wants, that the author wants us to have, the Job author wants us to have, which is, we don't know why things happen. And so when he gets that answer, Job gets the answer that the author wants us to have. And then it ends with Job gets everything back that he had lost. Now, so the only thing that Job does wrong is that he gives up, and he doesn't stay firm. Yeah, you're right, Judith. All the patriarchs make mistakes. Clearly, the way the story is set up, Job's mistake is the purpose of the book. I mean, not the purpose, but it allows for the punchline to happen, which is you just don't know why things happen. We don't know. It's God's plan and God's ideas, and we don't understand God. So yeah, I mean, is it the worst thing that anybody ever did? Not really, not by a long shot, but it is bad enough that's why he's not the greatest guy of all time, or make it into the top 3. He eventually does give up. And here's the explanation. I mean, here's kind of the explanation for that.
The Lord remonstrated with him for his lack of patience, saying, "Why did you murmur when suffering came upon you? Do you think yourself of greater worth than Adam, the creation of my own hands, upon whom together with his descendants I decreed death on account of a single transgression? And yet Adam murmured not. You are surely not more worthy than Abraham, whom I tempted with many trials. And when he asked, 'Whereby shall I know that I shall inherit the land?' And I replied, 'Know of a surety that your seed will be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them. And they shall afflict them for 400 years. He yet murmured not. You do not esteem yourself more worthy than Moses, do you? Him I would not grant the favor of entering the promised land, because he spoke the words, 'Hear now, you rebels, shall we bring you forth water out of this rock?' And yet he murmured not. Are you more worthy than Aaron, to whom I showed greater honor than any created being? For I sent the angels themselves out of the Holy of Holies when he entered the place. Yet when his 2 sons died, he murmured not."
So here's the point. Here's the point. Yeah, Judith, compared to some of what the other people do, it's maybe not, he's not the worst. But they all get punished.
But he complained.
And they don't complain. Now, I would argue that Moses does murmur. Moses doesn't give up, and the rabbis know that, and we read it. There's pages and pages of Moses arguing with God in his last moments. It's not a lot in the Torah, but there is basis for it in the Torah, where Moses is still saying to God at the end, "Let me come in." But Aaron doesn't say anything. Adam doesn't say anything. Abraham doesn't say anything when they're punished. Now, the funny thing about the way the rabbis told this stuff is that you can make the argument that what these other people do affects a lot of other people. Adam only made one mistake, but it affected all of humanity. But I do like the fact that the rabbis point out that Adam only broke one rule. On the other hand, he only had one rule. He didn't say that, but
he's 100%.
He was 100% wrong. Look, they're pointing out other people get punished in the Bible, and they don't say anything. Part of the issue is that Job doesn't know what he's done wrong. He keeps saying, "I didn't do anything wrong." So there is that issue, which the rabbis don't bring out here, because the point is only, why do you think that you can, complain about your punishment when all these other people didn't? And Aaron doesn't, as we see, he doesn't say anything or we don't read about him saying anything when his sons Nadav and Abihu die. The rabbis are I don't want to be critical of it, because they're actually making a really, really stellar point for everybody, especially for them. They're really making this point for themselves, by the way. And that is, you look at these guys, these patriarchs and these leaders, they don't say to God, "But it's me, God, you can't do this to me." And that's really, I think, the really powerful point of what we just read, is this feeling that these guys would have had to say to God, "Look, I do everything for you, God. Moses, I've been serving you for 40 years, doing nothing but what you've asked me to do, leading your people. You're not going to cut me a break? You're punishing me at all? Haven't I earned it?" And so the rabbis are making you have to go along with it. But the point that they're making is really, really powerful, which is that don't think that you've earned credit with God because of who you are or what you've done. And by the way, even if Job, is super righteous and is nice and everything else, he didn't do what Moses did. He didn't do what Aaron did. He didn't do what Abraham did. And so there's that kind of sense that, Job, take it down a notch, and also realize us, the rabbis, that we're not going to be spared tragedy because of what we do. And the most powerful modern reflection on this issue, the most powerful Job book of the last 50 years has been what book? Who wrote the modern book of Job? It's a bestseller, folks. Not as bestseller as the Bible, but it's sold a lot of books. When bad things happen to good people.
Oh, yeah.
That's the modern reflection, the modern Job, right? And it was written by a rabbi, right? It was written by Harold Kushner, right? And it's a lot of people who've read it over the years are not Jewish. They're inspired by his philosophy and his answer, his theology, his theodicy. Again, and he didn't call it why bad things happen to good people. He specifically called it when bad things happen to good people. That is, again, I know churches, evangelical churches that read the book, that encourage their reading groups to read the book. Obviously, all types of synagogues, all denominations, all strands of Christianity, I know have encouraged people to read the book because it's such a powerful book. Does anybody remember why he wrote the book? Anybody remember what spurred him to write that book?
His son died?
Yeah. And so his whole point was, here I am as a rabbi, and he was on the beginning of his career when he wrote the book. He wrote the book in 1981, so 40 years ago. He wrote the book right after his 14-year-old son died of progeria. And the book came out of his own pain. That's why he wrote it. He said, how could, he felt, look, I'm a rabbi, I'm dedicating my life to helping other people. Here he is in his mid 30s, early 40s. And he he couldn't understand why he was suffering like this. And so he wrote the book out of his own feeling like those guys. He felt like the rabbis who wrote this. He felt, like a Moses or Aaron saying, why am I suffering? And I'm trying to do, I'm trying to be a good person. I'm trying to lead other people to goodness. And so, he wrote it out of his own pain, his own feeling of being like Job. So the rabbis are trying to teach from this that we don't earn points that keep us from tragedy. Doesn't work like that. Let's take another look at why Job is not singled out, but what we learn from it.
The contrast between Job and the patriarchs appears from words spoken by him and words spoken by Abraham. Addressing God, Abraham said, "That be far from you to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, that so the righteous should be as the wicked." And Job exclaimed against God, "It is all one. Therefore I say, he destroys the perfect and the wicked." They both received their due recompense. Abraham was rewarded and Job was punished.
Interesting. They basically play off of a phrase in Job where Job says that God destroys the perfect and the wicked. Now, the context of why Job says it, you can make the argument, is that he's making a point, or the author is making a point, that the good and the bad both suffer. But what they notice, the rabbis point out, is that Abraham says that God won't do that. when the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which we read in 2 weeks from now, a week and a half from now, we read it on the Torah portion Vayera. You know, Abraham challenges God and says, you don't do that. Whereas Job seems to say, you do, God, you that's what happens. I mean, the things, I mean, you could say that those lines are kind of taken out of context a little bit, but the point is that the rabbis say that these lines exist in the Bible, and they do, which, by the way, when you really think about it, says a lot about the Bible, not the fact that one gets rewarded and one gets punished, but that both ideas are in the Bible. But that's the way the rabbis were able to bring these things together. They weren't willing to say, as we are today, that there seems to be some slightly different theologies or philosophies or theodicies in the Bible. And the one that exists in Genesis seems to be, no, God doesn't punish the righteous and the wicked in the same way. Whereas Job, by the time of Job, people are saying, yeah, but there are a lot of righteous people over the years who've been killed. Clearly, God doesn't protect them from being destroyed. And so Job has a different theology. Different from the Torah, which is really a cause and effect. You do something good things happen. You do something bad things happen. Job seems to have an answer. There's a plan. We don't know what it is. And then you can make the argument that Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, has a whole different line, which is, it doesn't seem that none of this seems to make any sense. But that's a whole nother discussion for another day. If we ever have a discussion about Ecclesiastes, where it doesn't seem to be much in the way of assurances on anything. The Job answer from God, again, is there is a plan. You and I can't figure it out, which still implies that there's a plan. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, seems to be, I'm not really sure there's a plan. And so you have, the Bible, the Torah, or, early parts of the Torah, what we call kind of like the biblical idea, the Jewish idea, which is do good happens. And maybe you don't get it right at the right time. I mean, the reason that we have a heaven and hell, to some extent, is to say that there is reward and there is punishment. That kind of answers that, if you have a heaven and hell. So again, keep that in mind as we're reading Job, that the rabbis aren't going to say that. They're not going to say there are different theologies or philosophies at work here. They're not going to say that. So let's continue.
Convinced that his suffering was undeserved and unjust, Job had the audacity to say to God, "O Lord of the world, you did create the ox with cloven feet and the ass with unparted hoof. You have created paradise and hell. You create the righteous and also the wicked. There is none to hinder. You can do as seems good in your sight." The friends of Job replied, "It is true, God has created the evil inclination, but he has also given man the Torah as a remedy against it. Therefore, the wicked cannot roll their guilt from off their shoulders and put it upon God."
This little paragraph here is very short, but really, when you think about it, quite profound, which is that there is a possibility here, which you can take away from Job. I guess you could take away from the Bible, or just your observation of the world. God, you created everything, including the bad stuff. So aren't you ultimately responsible for the bad stuff? I mean, that's the easy answer. I mean, not the easy answer, it's an easy answer, which is you did this. You made the world the way it is. And so what the rabbis do here is they actually side with the friends who basically tell Job, God is pure and God's good, and the answer is with God. Because they basically say, yeah, the world is the way it is, but the Torah is here. The Torah is here to help you. And therefore, if you make a bad decision and say, well, it wasn't my fault, it's here, God made it, you can't do that, because God's actually given you the ability not to make a bad decision and give you the strength not to make the bad decision through the Torah. So you have an answer. And so you can't simply say to God, yeah, but it's all here. You made it. It's your fault. So it's a pretty powerful idea, and one that the rabbis recognize is a possible way that people will go, which is not my fault. If I have an evil inclination, God put it there. You can't do that. And so they actually they cut Job off down there at the knees and say, you don't go down that road, because we do know better. So here we go. And again, this is all the rabbis reading Job and trying to figure out what they can take away. You'll really see it here. You'll really see it in this section we're about to do right now.
Mark, I don't remember. When do we read Job during the year?
When do the rabbis tell us to read Job?
Yeah, yes. Because you got Esther at Purim, you got Ecclesiastes at Tisha B'Av.
There's no tradition that we have to read Job at any time. It's not read at a holiday. It's not like the scrolls. First of all, it's a very long book. Okay. So it doesn't have a fixed place in the cycles of reading. So the longest book so what Judith's referring to is we have 5 scrolls. We have 5 Megillot. Now we only talk about Megillat Esther, right? That's the one that people know the best. Scroll of Esther, right? Excuse me. Which is 9 chapters, and not very long ones. Am I right? 9 chapters. Maybe, let me just see. Anyways, it's very short. Yeah, 9 chapters. Ruth is 4. Ecclesiastes, I think, is 12 chapters, and they're not very long. These aren't long books. The ones that we read on the holidays, Song of Songs, I think, is 5. These are books that you can read in 15, 20 minutes if you're reading them out loud. So Job is quite a long book. It's not an easy book to read, even today, by today's standards. It's a beautiful book. I mean, it's really written with some beautiful stylistic poetry, and it's quite amazing that it was written thousands of years ago, no matter what. There's a tradition that some people have of reading it before Yom Kippur to kind of get them in the mood for, big questions and punishments and it's kind of a Yom Kippur type, feeling of big questions. But there's no time that we have to sit there and read it. I mean, the other book that is, read a lot, and I mean much more than Job, is Psalms, because it's also read at times of crisis, excuse me, also at holidays and things like that. But I mean, these longer books, we call them, actually, the books that we call the wisdom literature in Judaism are Job, Proverbs, and Kohelet. Those are considered the wisdom literature. And they're more philosophical, and they're definitely not celebratory readings. They're not narratives. I mean, Job has a little bit of story, a little narrative, but not a lot. It's a tough book to read. I mean, it's not a book that I would, I'd lay on someone's lap unless they were in the mood for it. It's a tough book. So again, some people read it at, Yom Kippur time, high holiday time. But, we're reading the Midrash on it. The rabbis are intrigued by it. But in modern, like, rabbinical schools and yeshivas and stuff like that, it's not a super popular book to be studied. Let me put it that way. There's not a lot of rabbinic writing on it over the centuries because it's problematic. I mean, there are things in here that are not easy to digest, put it that way. And plus, at the end of the day, Job's not a Jew. I mean, Job being a righteous Gentile, he's great, and we're obviously supposed to learn from him. The book is there, but he's not assumedly, he's not even responsible for Jewish tradition. I mean, I guess you could say Dina would have made him if he indeed they were married. But yeah, tough book to read. All right, so let's keep going.
The reason Job did not shrink from such extravagant utterances was because he denied the resurrection of the dead. He judged of the prosperity of the wicked and the woes of the pious only by their earthly fortunes. Proceeding from this false premise, he held it to be possible that the punishment falling to his share was not at all intended for him. God had slipped into an error. He imposed the suffering upon him that had been appointed unto a sinner. But God spoke to him, saying, "Many hairs have I created upon the head of man, yet each hair has its own sac. For were two hairs to draw their nourishment from the same sac, man would lose the sight of his eyes. It has never happened that a sac has been misplaced. Should I then have mistaken Job for another? I let many drops of rain descend from the heavens, and for each drop there is a mold in the clouds. For were two drops to issue from the same mold, the ground would be made so miry that it could not bring forth any growth. It has never happened that a mold has been misplaced. Should I then have mistaken Job for another? Many thunderbolts I hurl from the skies, but each one comes from its own path. For were two to proceed from the same path, they would destroy the whole world. It has never happened that a path has been misplaced. Should I then have mistaken Job for another? The gazelle gives birth to her young on the topmost point of a rock, and it would fall into the abyss and be crushed to death if I did not send an eagle there to catch it up and carry it to its mother. Were the eagle to appear a minute earlier or later than the appointed time, the little gazelle would perish. It has never happened that the proper minute of the time was missed. Should I then have mistaken Job for another? The hind has a contracted womb and would not be able to bring forth her young if I did not send a dragon to her at the right second to nibble at her womb and soften it, for then she can bear. Were the dragon to come a second before or after the right time, the hind would perish. It has never happened that I missed the right second. Should I then have mistaken Job for another?
Okay, so let's pause right there. This is a very strange explanation for what happens to Job. Um, why Job does something that's so wrong. Well, let's get to the main point. So there's a lot of things that the rabbis or the person who wrote this makes some amazing observations about the universe, about the planet and life, that some of them seem strange to us today. Actually, most of them seem kind of strange to us today. But the idea that God has a place for everything in the universe, even the hairs on your head, is kind of an interesting idea. So it gets to the point that God doesn't make mistakes. Job thought God must have messed up, which definitely seems to be one of Job's points, is that this isn't right. I've been dealt somebody else's hand. This isn't supposed to be for me. I'm not playing. This is not right. So by saying that, he falls into a trap. And so here you have this rabbinic version of essentially what God says to Job, which is, Job, you don't know. You weren't there when I created the universe. You don't. So that is in the book of Job, a very famous line where God speaks to Job and says, Job, I made planets, I made stars, you don't think I know what I'm doing? There's a reason for these things, and there's a bigger picture. So Job's answer, the rabbis say, or at least here say, is based on a false premise, which is that we only see what happens in this world, and Job makes the conclusion that this is wrong because I'm suffering, and because he doesn't believe that there's a world to come, that there's a heaven, that he falls into this line of thinking that this is wrong, that God's made a mistake. So again, as I said, the way the rabbis understood theology, they were going by a biblical picture of the universe, which is that God has a plan for everything, that everything is part of that plan. And even more so, they go to kind of the Genesis and through Deuteronomy idea, which is that trust that it's not arbitrary. The plan isn't arbitrary, and that you're just not a cog in it, that you will actually be rewarded in the world to come, that any suffering that you have in this world will be fixed, that if in the process of being part of that bigger picture you suffer, it'll all be fixed. They really, really understand it that way, which is that's what heaven and hell is for, to fix the errors, or not the errors, but the injustices of this world. It's not an error at all, but there's a way to fix it in the world to come. So if you believe in the world to come, then there's no problem with what happens here. Job doesn't believe in the world to come, therefore he thinks that it's a mistake. So again, this is why, again, the idea of world to come was so important to the rabbis, that it allowed for a biblical, especially again, an early biblical understanding of why do bad things happen. So that is what they just did to Job, which is explain it by saying that if Job only believed in the world to come, he'd be okay. Does everybody get that? That's the real point of that all. There is a plan. God has a plan. And if the plan doesn't help you, if you don't, let's finish this last line here for this one.
Notwithstanding Job's unpardonable words, God was displeased with his friends for passing harsh judgment upon him. A man may not be held responsible for what he does in his anguish. And Job's agony was great indeed.
Right. And that is the fact that Job's friends don't seem to be very compassionate. And the rabbis don't, as much as they say the friends are speaking correctly in the sense that they're right and their logic is correct. So they don't. The interesting thing is in the book of Job itself, it seems like the friends are wrong. They're like a foil for saying the wrong things, which again are traditional things, but the author of Job is saying, no, that doesn't work. Those things that they say don't work. The rabbis aren't going to say that because those are the things that they believe. So they're not going to throw the friends under the bus, but they will say, look, they shouldn't have said it. And the author of Job clearly is passing bad judgment on the friends. But the rabbis say it's not really for what they say, but for what they do, how they do it, which is they come across as somebody who are not compassionate. These people, these three friends, are not compassionate. And Job is suffering. And when someone suffered, there's a great tradition. We don't hold them responsible for what they say in anguish. The rabbis, by the way, say you cannot hold a woman responsible for what she says when she's delivering a baby. It's true. Can't hold them responsible for what they say when they're in pain or suffering. So it's a good line to remember too. A man may not be held responsible for what he says or what he does in anguish. So everybody good about that? I like that. It definitely allows for forgiveness and for recognition that we have to cut people some slack, especially when they're suffering. I guess you can make the argument we're all suffering a little bit right now, but some more than others. But you're not held responsible when you're in deep agony. All right.
Job's wealth and benefactions. Job asked once what he considered the severest affliction that could strike him. And he replied, my enemy's joy in my misfortune. And when God demanded to know of him after the accusations made by Satan, what he preferred, poverty or physical suffering, he chose pain, saying, O Lord of the whole world, chastise my body with suffering of all kinds, only preserve me from poverty. Poverty seemed the greater scourge, because before his trials he had occupied a brilliant position on account of his vast wealth. God graciously granted him this foretaste of the messianic time. The harvest followed close upon the plowing of his field. No sooner were the seeds strewn in the furrows than they sprouted and grew and ripened produce. He was equally successful with his cattle. His sheep killed wolves, but were themselves never harmed by wild beasts. Of sheep, he had no less than 130,000, and he required 800 dogs to keep guard over them, not to mention the 200 dogs needed to secure the safety of his house. Besides, his herds consisted of 340,000 asses and 3,500 pairs of oxen. All these possessions were not used for self-indulgent pleasures, but for the good of the poor and the needy, whom he clothed and fed and provided with all things necessary. To do all this, he even had to employ ships that carried supplies to all the cities and the dwelling places of the destitute. His house was furnished with doors on all of its four sides, that the poor and the wayfarer might enter no matter from what direction they approached. At all times there were 30 tables laden with viands ready in his house, and 12 besides for the widows only, so that all who came found what they desired. Job's consideration of the poor was so delicate that he kept servants to wait upon them constantly. His guests, enraptured by his charitableness, frequently offered themselves as attendants to minister to the poor in his house. But Job always insisted upon paying them for their services. If he was asked for a loan of money to be used for business purposes, and the borrower promised to give a part of his profits to the poor, he would demand no security beyond a mere signature. And if it happened that by some mischance or other, the debtor was not able to discharge his obligation, Job would return the note to him or tear it into bits in his presence.
Wow. Quite an amazing guy, right? And, you know, he had lots of stuff, but he had it not for his own benefit, but to help others. So he wanted to have this great wealth to help the poor, the widow, the orphan, people who needed help. He had a very large, operation. I just like the fact he had 200 dogs
around his house alone.
I don't even want to think about that. It kind of gives you an idea of when this was written, because dogs were not a part of everyday life for people in the Middle East, or at least in Israel, until a much later period, like rabbinic period, you know, and even then seems to be a pretty Persian type influence. Dogs were definitely more popular on the Babylonian Persian side of the spectrum. The Egyptian side, definitely they were cat people. Egyptians were cat people, Babylonians were dog people. Israel's in the middle, and
they go for goats.
As in, they were influenced by both. Well, they did have, they didn't have their goats, but they had pets, and if they had a pet, for pet purposes, they were cats. For purposes of safety and purposes of taking care of the flocks and you know, doing a little bit of work, getting rid of pests, dogs were definitely preferred. But dogs were still, you know, these were not golden doodles. These were hunting dogs and shepherding dogs and dogs that were not chihuahuas. So they were used around. I just think it's amazing. 200 dogs. I'm getting sick of the one that was screaming. You probably heard him in the background. Sure, just closed the door because it was in between time. I don't know. It was just yelping time. So we had a wonderful pet service, by the way, the other day. I want to remind people we had a wonderful turnout and a lot of really well-behaved dogs, and it was beautiful. So, but he has lots of stuff, Job. He has lots of animals. He has lots of property. And what's interesting about this Midrash is you see what it is when you make money. When people come to you and ask for loans, what did he do? He if people were going to give part of their profits to the poor, then they didn't even have to leave anything as security, which, by the way, tells you that, and we know this from the Bible itself, that people would leave things with somebody, you know, as a security, right? It's how pawn shops developed. People would take out loans against their property. It says that Job didn't require that as long as you signed, which, by the way, is interesting that a signature was still required. So it tells you that in Judaism, or at least not Judaism, Jewish tradition, signatures were important. We know that, by the way, because you have to sign a ketubah. Witnesses have to sign it. We have documents. I mean, the ketubah, obviously, we still do. But we have documents from 2,000 years ago that are signed and in some cases sealed with a seal, that we know who signed it, and how important it was, because it was actually a legal document that had to have a signature on it. So this isn't like a new thing that, in the last couple hundred years we have to sign something. You had to sign things. But again, Job was so kind and compassionate and caring for everybody that he wouldn't even, in some cases, again, he wouldn't even make people pay their note. So again, we know how wealthy he is from the Bible. The Midrash goes even further, and again makes him a little bit like our ancestor Abraham, who had, according to Midrash, a tent that was open on all sides to let those people come in from all directions. That's more of a hospitality issue with Abraham. He lets guests come in and eat at his table and bring them into the community. Here, it's a little bit different in that it's for the poor. It's a charity. It's more of a charity thing than a guest than guests.
Job was more situated. Abraham was a bit of a wanderer.
No doubt. I mean, Abraham does, as we learn, does accumulate quite a lot considering he's a wanderer. But yes, and for Abraham, the mitzvah is Haknasat Orachim, which is literally welcoming in guests, which is great and very important. And what Job seems to be doing is even in some ways even higher. He's not just letting in, a wanderer who could be a wealthy guy. He's letting in the poor. He's actually doing like active charity work, and even more so, he's sending out ships. He's sending out supplies to the poor and getting food to them, on his dime. So it's you look. I think behind this is this idea, of course, that we all should aspire to do this, but that there might have been people, during the rabbinic period who did these kind of things, that took care of the poor, in other lands, if they knew that there were, and we do that today. I mean, obviously, a lot of people do that for people in Israel, right? They want to make sure that the food pantries in Israel are also stocked up with food, but I mean, in addition to obviously our local pantries, but a lot of people do that. And a lot of people send money to Africa and all around the world to save the children and do work, not just in their own country. So that's what it says that Job did. It says that Job sent out ships to other countries. You don't go by ship unless you're going to another country in Israel. So more about what Job does.
Whoops, hold on. He did not rest satisfied at supplying the material needs of those who applied to him. He strove also to convey the knowledge of God to them. After a meal, he was in the habit of having music played upon some instruments. Then he would invite those present to join him in songs of praise to God. On such occasions, he did not consider himself above playing the cithern while the musicians rested.
So he also liked to talk to people about authorization. Is somebody playing the cithern back there? There is an idea that he would he liked a little music too. He liked having a little music, and specifically songs of praise to God. He would sing, Hallel and psalms, and even would jam with the musicians a little bit. He liked to jam. So that's amazing. The guy, here you are in the guy's house and everyone's having a good time and eating and feeling good. And there he is. He just starts playing with the band. Pretty cool. So Job seems like a really dope guy. No, he's really cool. He's really cool. And he does all these wonderful things. Why is this poor man going to suffer? Here we go.
Most particularly, Job concerned himself about the wail and woe of widows and orphans. He was wont to pay visits to the sick, both rich and poor, and when it was necessary, he would bring a physician along with him. If the case turned out to be hopeless, he would sustain the stricken family with advice and consolation. When the wife of the incurably sick man began to grieve and weep, he would encourage her with such words as these: "Trust always in the grace and loving kindness of God. He has not abandoned you until now, and he will not forsake you henceforth. Your husband will be restored to health and will be able to provide for his family as heretofore. But if, which may God forfend, your husband should die, I call heaven to witness that I shall provide sustenance for you and your children. Having spoken thus, he would send for a notary and have him drop a document, which he signed in the presence of witnesses, binding himself to care for the family should it be bereaved of its head. Thus he earned for himself the blessing of the sick man and the gratitude of the sorrowing wife.
Wow. Again, this is a guy that's doing these amazing mitzvahs and also trying to help those that are most vulnerable. He would try to get the guy healthy, but if the father and husband was going to die, he took care of the family. Pretty wild. It says that he brought, he bring a notary out. They had those kind of jobs in those days. They were notaries back then, whose job it was to essentially do a little bit of what lawyers do today, which is actually draw up the document, but also to witness it and to sign it themselves as a witness, and to confirm the witnesses, the other witnesses too. They have driver's license, but they had ways of, again, confirming. In some cases, you had to bring a witness to confirm that who you are, or they would go to someone else in town and say, who is this guy? This is what they did when they drew up documents. But again, he didn't have to do this. Nobody told him he had to take care of the widow and the orphan. He just wanted to do it. And he wanted them to know that they would be cared for. It's again, amazing example of, what makes Job so righteous and so great was this type of behavior. All right, let's keep reading about what Job did.
Sometimes, in case of necessity, Job would be severe too, especially when it was a question of helping a poor man obtain his due. If one of the parties to a suit cited before his tribunal was known to be a man of violence, he would surround himself with his army and inspire him with fear, so that the culprit could not but show himself amenable to his decision. He endeavored to inculcate his benevolent ways upon his children by accustoming them to wait upon the poor. On the morrow, after a feast, he would sacrifice bountifully to God, and together with the pieces upon the altar, his offerings would be divided among the needy. He would say, "Take and help yourselves and pray for my children. It may be that they have sinned and renounced God, saying the presumption of their hearts, 'We are the children of this rich man. All these things are our possessions. Why should we be servants to the poor?'"
Wow. So what's the point of that?
Showing that his kids weren't good.
Uh-huh. Yeah. This isn't theoretical, folks. This isn't theoretical. By the time the rabbis write this, I'm sure it's not an issue in the book of Job. We know the kids die. His kids die. The first batch of kids die. But there's this interesting idea here, which is just because Job is a good guy and takes care of the poor and does all these wonderful things, there was no guarantee that his kids were going to do the same. And it would be very easy for his kids, on the contrary, to say, "We're not doing this. We're not going to continue this taking care of the poor." It happens a lot. Not always. There's a lot of cases where there are wealthy philanthropists whose kids are also following that tradition. But it's not a foregone conclusion, and the rabbis recognize that. And so they're essentially there's a cautionary lesson in here too, which is that you need to actually have your kids do some of this work themselves. don't think that they're just going to get it genetically from you. But they have to do a little bit themselves. It should become part of their behavior. Some of their habit should be their routine should be caring for the poor. So it becomes part of what they do. Yeah. Pretty heavy. It's a pretty heavy lesson, which has been proven and unfortunately is oftentimes borne out by what happens to people. Again, how do you make sure that your kids will continue to do the things that you do if you just tell them to do them and if they don't do them? All right. So all this is explaining why Job is the way he is. Why is Job a righteous guy? We have little bits and pieces of what happens next, but this is really based on the first lines of the book of Job, that Job was a righteous guy. He was a good guy. Everybody loved him. He took care of the poor, and he was a good man. That's all we know about Job at the very beginning. Then we get into this next issue, which is why does Job even go through this? Which again, could be that we have a story of a guy who suffers, who doesn't deserve it. It is possible that the author of the part of the book of Job that we know so well, the beginning and the end, added that to an existing story of a person that suffers. And we have other versions of this. I actually wrote a paper for it about this in college. There are other examples of suffering, of people who are good that suffer in ancient Near Eastern texts, some of them older than the book of Job. We have a Babylonian text. We have an Egyptian text that are very similar in a lot of ways to the book of Job. But the biblical book has a conceit to it, which is that Job definitely doesn't deserve to suffer. And it's essentially, again, a game between Satan and God. And remember, when the Bible, in the biblical version of the story, Satan is not necessarily evil in the sense that he's not the prince of darkness. He's not the head of innumerable demons whose job it is to torment people, or the chief of hell. Satan in the Bible at least seems to be, and again in early Judaism, seems to be more of, again, the prosecuting attorney, as we say, the angel whose job it is to bring up the worst in people, not bring out the worst in them necessarily, and that makes them do the things, but reminds God, people aren't that good. Let me show you why. And that's what Satan does. Satan literally means the adversary. But is he the adversary of God, or is he the adversary of people? And if he's the adversary of people, then he's not necessarily evil. He's just kind of reminding God, and of course reminding us, that we're far from perfect. So keep that in mind. And then also keep in mind that by the time the rabbis wrote this Midrash, Satan is now Satan. Satan? It's Satan who does bad stuff and will make you do bad stuff, and who is looking forward to one day tormenting you in hell. That type of Satan has now entered into the mind of the people who are reading this and who this text is for. Not necessarily the Satan in the book of Job itself. Just keep that in mind. So the Midrash is a later interpretation, and a later, therefore, bring in later ideas about who Satan or Satan is. So let's take a look at that bad guy.
Satan and Job. The happy, God-pleasing life led by Job for many years excited the hatred of Satan, who had an old grudge against him. Near Job's house, there was an idol worshipped by the people. Suddenly, doubts assailed the heart of Job, and he asked himself, is this idol really the creator of heaven and earth? How can I find out the truth about it? In the following night, he perceived a voice calling, Yovav, Yovav, arise, and I will tell you who he is, whom you desirous to know. This one, to whom the people offer sacrifices, is not God. He is the handiwork of the tempter, wherewith he deceives men. When he heard the voice, Job threw himself on the ground and said, O Lord, if this idol is the handiwork of the tempter, then grant that I may destroy it. None can hinder me, for I am the king of this land. Job, or as he is sometimes called, Yovav or Jobab, which sounds silly, was indeed king of Edom, the land wherein wicked plans are concocted against God. Wherefore it is also called Uz, counsel.
And that's the land of Uz. That says that that Job lived in the land of Uz. And the word Uz in Hebrew also means counsel. Okay, so it's a little play on the name. It's all we know about Job. And here again is the tradition that he is Yovav, the one that we read about in Genesis chapter 36. But again, back to the story of the idol.
The voice continued to speak. It made itself known as that of an archangel of God, and revealed to Job that he would bring down the enmity of Satan upon himself by the destruction of the idol and much suffering with it. However, if he remained steadfast under them, God would change his troubles into joys. His name would become celebrated throughout the generations of mankind, and he would have a share in the resurrection to eternal life. Job replied to the voice, out of love of God, I am ready to endure all things unto the day of my death. I will shrink back from naught. Now Job arose, and accompanied by 50 men, he repaired to the idol and destroyed it.
Okay. So this little story that we're reading here, and we're not done, we're only partway through it, but let me just pause right now to explain it. This is a story that explains that Job essentially takes on the responsibility of what happens to him by doing what he's going to do now, by going to war against this statue that is Satan, that's a way of worshiping Satan, and that Job is told ahead of time that if he does this, it's going to be bad for him, but the payback will be worth it. And so here Job literally says, out of love of God, I will endure this. And that he willingly takes it on. He willingly takes on this confrontation with Satan. So that's an interesting midrash, because it totally changes the perspective that we have of what Job does, which is that Job knows full well what he's doing. All right, so this makes Job very courageous. It also makes it kind of like a foregone conclusion that he's going to be punished, or he's going to have to endure this. But it also makes him even more righteous for going against idolatry.
Anyway, knowing he's going to be punished.
So here we go.
Knowing that Satan would try to approach him, he ordered his guard not to give access to anyone. And then he withdrew to his chamber. He had guessed aright. Satan appeared at once in the guise of a beggar and demanded speech with Job. The guard executed his orders and forbade his entering. Then the mendicant asked him to intercede for him with Job for a piece of bread. Job knew it was Satan, and he sent word to him as follows: do not expect to eat of my bread, for it is prohibited to you. At the same time, putting a piece of burnt bread into the hand of the guard for Satan. The servant was ashamed to give a beggar burnt bread, and he substituted a good piece for it. Satan, however, knowing that the servant had not executed his master's errand, told him so to his face, and he fetched the burnt bread and handed it to him, repeating the words of Job. Thereupon, Satan returned this answer: as the bread is burnt, so I will disfigure your body. Job replied. Do as you desirest and execute your plan. As for me, I am ready to suffer whatever you bring down upon me.
Okay. So Job, again, seems to be completely defiant to Satan and doesn't care. He's basically saying, I don't care, do what you want. Give me your best. This is raises a whole bunch more theological questions, which we're going to see as we continue this story.
Now Satan betook himself to God, and he prayed him to put Job into his power, saying, I went to and fro in the earth and walked up and down in it, and I saw no man as pious as Abraham. You did promise him the whole land of Palestine, and yet he did not take it in ill part, that he had not so much as a burial place for Sarah. As for Job, it is true, I found none that loves you as he does. But if you will put him into my hand, I shall succeed in turning his heart away from you. But God spoke, Satan, Satan, what have you a mind to do with my servant Job, like whom there is none on the earth? Satan persisted in his request touching Job, and God granted it. He gave him full power over Job's possessions. This day of Job's accusation was the New Year's Day, whereon the good and evil deeds of man are brought before God.
Yeah. So again, this is maybe one of the reasons why we read this book around high holiday times, because it reminds us that this is when there's the accounting for our deeds. So Satan has it in for Job. It doesn't really explain why God would back Satan in that way, but it does imply that God doesn't think that Job is going to screw up. That he allows Job to essentially go through this because he doesn't think Job will. God doesn't think Job will mess up. It's again, the problem that we have with the book of Job, not the problem, but the challenges that Job gives us are not necessarily in the book itself. The book makes us think about things, and we can struggle, agree, or be inspired or reflect on the message of the book of Job. The issue that everybody has is with or not the issue, but the where people get hung up is in the first chapter. And this is where the rabbis have it even harder, because by the time the rabbis are writing, Satan is not doing God's work. Satan is really in it for himself, and is not just the prosecuting attorney, but is a malevolent force in the world. And so because they already had all that with Satan, they have to deal with the fact that Satan really doesn't seem very powerful in the book of Job on that one hand, but they have to deal with the fact that, like, why is God even talking to and so this is for them, this is an issue too. For them, that this is something that they have to approach in a way that's going to make them feel comfortable. I think what's interesting is that in our day, like for us, I shouldn't say for us, for many of us, maybe most of us, in the Jewish world today, we would say that a lot of the talk about Satan or the devil, whatever, is kind of Christian. We don't that wrapped up into it. I mean, I would say most people. I don't want to say everybody, and I'm not going to even speak for myself. I'm just going to say that most of us are not obsessed with Satan as a force in the universe, or even think about it. So for us, when we read the story of Job, it's really not that problematic in the sense that if Satan is just another one of God's angels, he does this little conversation with God, and he's really just there to more just prove that is Job good or not. If you live in a world where Satan is actively at work and messing up the world and hurting people and leading the forces of darkness, it's a little bit harder. So the Midrash is really addressing those people who, but why is God even talking to Satan? Why is this even happening? So just keep that in mind, that this is, for us, this Midrash, this whole need to kind of put Satan in a framework where he's almost putting one over on God. We don't need that. I mean, today, I would say most of us don't need that. So in the Bible, you know what? As a matter of fact, let's just take a real quick look at the very, very beginning of Job, so that you can see what I'm talking about. It's really, really, yeah, and we'll have time to come pretty close to finishing this. We're kind of in the realm right now where we're going to be very close to finishing Job, Midrash. Hold on one second. Let me just put this up here. It says in the book of Job, one day when the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord, and the adversary, which is the way they translate in this one here, they don't even call him Satan, they call him the adversary. Yeah, the Lord said to the adversary, where have you been? The adversary said, I've been roaming all over the earth. And the Lord said to the adversary, have you noticed my servant Job? There's none like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil. And the adversary answered the Lord, does Job not have good reason to fear God? Why is it you fenced around him and everything you had, you've blessed him? But lay your hand upon all he has, and you will surely blaspheme your face. And the Lord said to the adversary, see that all he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on him. And he departed. And then what does Job do? He kills everybody in Job's life, and he takes away all his stuff. And Job says, after everything's taken from him, naked I came out of my womb, my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord is given, the Lord is taken away. Adonai natan, Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevorach. God will be blessed. So Job doesn't turn on God, does not say wrong. And then the second time, the divine beings come before God, and the adversary is there. And again, God says to him, have you seen my man Job? You know, you did everything to him and no reason for it. God says there's no reason for it. And Satan says, skin for skin, all that a man he will give up for his life, but lay a hand on his bones and flesh, he will surely blaspheme you to your face. And the Lord said to the adversary, do what you want to him then, just don't kill him. And the adversary went and afflicted him with inflammation. And what does Job's wife say? Keep your integrity, but blaspheme God and die. And then the friends come, and then we get into the story. We get into the meat of it. Folks, you know, Job doesn't seem to be, in the way that the story is set up, anything other than a pawn to basically be confronted with these kinds of things. Satan couldn't be so ineffective or ineffectual as he is in the book of Job, because Satan was something that the rabbis were actually fearful of. And you'll see this now.
Among the adversaries,
Wait,
sorry, Job's suffering. Equipped with unlimited power, Satan endeavored to deprive Job of all he owned. He burnt part of his cattle, and the other part was carried off by enemies. What pained Job more than this was the recipients of his bounty turned against him and took of his belongings. Among the adversaries that assailed him was Lilith, the queen of Sheba. She lived at a great distance from his residence. It took her and her army 3 years to travel from her home to his. She fell upon his oxen and his asses and took possession of them after slaying the men to whose care Job had entrusted them. One man escaped alone. Wounded and bruised, he had only enough life in him to tell Job the tale of his losses, and then he fell down dead. The sheep, which had been left unmolested by the queen of Sheba, were taken away by the Chaldeans. Job's first intention was to go to war against these marauders, but when he was told that some of his property had been consumed by fire from heaven, he desisted and said, "If the heavens turn against me, I can do nothing."
Wow. So Lilith is involved in this. And not only is she known as the queen of demons, she's also the queen, in this case, the queen of Sheba. And this is somebody that Satan uses to attack him. But again, after this first hit, Job says, this isn't just normal stuff. This must be the will of God. So he does want to respond. He's going to go to war and take back his property, but he says, oh man, this seems to be God's will. First shot doesn't work.
Dissatisfied with the result, Satan disguised himself as the king of Persia, besieged the city of Job's residence, took it, and spoke to the inhabitants, saying, "This man Job has appropriated all the goods in the world, leaving nothing for others. And he has also torn down the temple of our God. And now I will pay him back for his wicked deeds. Come with me and let us pillage his house." At first, the people refused to hearken to the words of Satan. They feared that the sons and daughters of Job might rise up against them later and avenge their father's wrongs. But after Satan had pulled down the house wherein the children of Job were assembled, and they lay dead in the ruins, the people did as he bade them and sacked the house of Job. Seeing that neither the loss of all he had nor the death of his children could change his pious heart, Satan appeared before God a second time and requested that Job himself, his very person, be put into his hand. God granted Satan's plea, but he limited his power to Job's body. His soul he could not touch. In a sense, Satan was worse off than Job. He was in the position of the slave that had been ordered by his master to break the pitcher and not spill the wine.
Wow. So that's the way the rabbis interpret what happens here, which is that Satan definitely has it out for Job, and partially because he tore down his statue. So Satan was being worshipped in Job's lands, and so Satan had a definite reason to want to get rid of Job, and so he attacks him, kills his kids. Again, we read this doesn't do it either, and now Job is now he's given permission to hurt Job, but only his physical body. He can't do anything to his soul. Which, by the way, it's interesting here, which it seems as though that maybe Satan could have done something against his soul, but God won't let him. So it's almost as if, again, the way the rabbis tell it here, he actually put Satan in a very deep problem here, which is that if you can attack someone's body but not their soul, you really can't do any damage to them, because what really counts is the soul. But the idea that like Satan could have damaged his soul is really kind of scary, which also, of course, gives a lot of power to Satan. But it also, again, makes it seem like, he can't win. He can't win like this. And again, that's why you have this analogy: break the pitcher, but don't let the wine spill. You can't do that. So in the analogy, obviously the body is the pitcher, is the vessel, but what really counts, what really you want, is the wine inside. That's our soul. All right, so Satan's not done.
Satan now caused a terrific storm to burst over the house of Job. He was cast from his throne by the reverberations, and he lay upon the floor for 3 hours. Then Satan smote his body with leprosy from the sole of his foot to his crown. This plague forced Job to leave the city and sit down outside upon an ash heap, for his lower limbs were covered with oozing boils, and the issue flowed out upon the ashes. The upper part of his body was encrusted with dry boils, and to ease the itching they caused him, he used his nails until they dropped off together with his fingertips. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal. His body swarmed with vermin. But if one of the little creatures attempted to crawl away from him, he forced it back, saying, "Remain on the place where you were sent, until God assigns another to you." His wife, fearful that he would not bear his horrible suffering with steadfastness, advised him to pray to God for death, that he might be sure of going hence an upright man. But he rejected her counsel, saying, "If in the days of good fortune, which usually tempts men to deny God, I stood firm and did not rebel against him, surely I shall be able to remain steadfast under misfortune, which compels men to be obedient to God." And Job stuck to his resolve in spite of all suffering, while his wife was not strong enough to bear her fate with resignation to the will of God.
So the wife doesn't come across looking very good. Well, she doesn't come across looking very good in the story itself, so we shouldn't be really surprised that she doesn't look great in the Midrash either. Job makes a very interesting point here, of course, which is that it's very easy for people to, what do they say? There's no atheists in foxholes. He says, look, I was steadfast to God when I was wealthy, when it's easy for people to deny God. So I'm not going to do it now. And so the wife, comes across looking really, really bad because she wants him to basically give up, curse God, and die. The whole system's broken, she's saying, and you're just better off dead. Very human reaction to this. We don't know really what happens to the wife and to Satan in the story. We don't hear what happens to Satan in the book of Job. We don't know. I mean, assumedly, he has to admit he's wrong and that's it. But we don't really have that conversation. That line isn't in there. And we really don't know what happens to his wife. So the idea that he has a second wife, that something happens to his first wife, kind of makes sense. Second wife being Dinah, as we read, but we really don't know. And so the Midrash is going to give us a little answer about that. Let's read.
Her lot was bitter indeed, for she had had to take service as a water carrier with a common churl. And when her master learnt that she shared her bread with Job, he dismissed her. To keep her husband from starving, she cut off her hair and purchased bread with it. It was all she had to pay the price charged by the bread merchant, none other than Satan himself, who wanted to put her to the test. He said to her, "Had you not deserved this great misery of yours, it had not come upon you." This speech was more than the poor woman could bear. Then it was that she came to her husband and amid tears and groans, urged him to renounce God and die. Job, however, was not perturbed by her words, because he divined at once that Satan stood behind his wife and seduced her to speak thus. Turning to the tempter, he said, "Why do you not meet me frankly? Give up your underhand ways, you wretch. Thereupon Satan appeared before Job, admitted that he had been vanquished, and went away abashed.
So that's the way the Midrash says Job vanquished Satan. And that it seems as though the wife doesn't. Look, we don't know what happens to the wife for sure. The fact that Job has a whole nother set of kids when the kids seem to be quite old to begin with when they died leads us to believe that he started over with a new woman. It's possible. It doesn't say that. It says he has more kids. So maybe she just had kids at a very late age. But the problem is that when we see Job's wife, she's not behaving great. So we're going to read these last two sections, and this is not enough for only next week, and so I don't say we're going to go too fast in this, but because I don't want to. This is important stuff. This is actually the bulk of the text. But what we just read, folks, technically speaking, all the pages we just read was only the commentary on the first two chapters of the book of Job. There's 42 chapters here, folks, and most of the Midrash is on those two chapters. The four friends appear at the end of chapter 2 and then go all the way until, towards the end of the book. It's only the last chapter, which is, and they live happily ever after. That's literally chapter 42. That's it. I mean, it's not even all of chapter 42. It is literally, you can make the argument, it is really the last 8 lines of it, and then we'll read that to Job restored. But let's read what the four friends. So this is basically chapters 3 through 42 is just this section. So here's what, because again, there's not a lot of story. It's not a lot of narrative. It's what they have to say. It's the dialogue back and forth between the friends and Job. All right, here we go.
The four friends. The friends of Job lived in different places at intervals of 300 miles, one from the other. Nevertheless, they all were informed of their friend's misfortune at the same time, in this way. Each one had the pictures of the others set in his crown, and as soon as any one of them met with reverses, it showed itself in his picture. Thus the friends of Job learnt simultaneously of his misfortune, and they hastened to his assistance.
Yes, we call this the ancient Instagram. The Instagram crown.
I was going to go Harry Potter.
No, it is definitely very magical. We have lots of beautiful fairy tales about things that, what's it called? Beauty and the Beast, those kind of things, mirrors and that shape people are in misfortune. But so they all get to know what's going on with each other. It's nice. They kept in contact. But that's how they knew. So even they lived far apart, they all knew. Okay.
The four friends were related to one another, and each one was related to Job. Eliphaz, king of Teman, was a son of Esau. Bildad, Zophar, and Elihu were cousins. Their fathers, Shua, Naamat, and Barachel, were the sons of Buz, who was a brother of Job and a nephew of Abraham. When the four friends arrived in the city in which Job lived, the inhabitants took them outside the gates, and pointing to a figure reclining upon an ash heap at some distance off, they said, "Yonder is Job." At first, the friends would not give them credence, and they decided to look more closely at the man to make sure of his identity. But the foul smell emanating from Job was so strong that they could not come near to him. They ordered their armies to scatter perfumes and aromatic substances all around. Only after this had been done for hours, they could approach the outcast close enough to recognize him.
Wow. That is really not good. This is, again, still really based on the first end of chapter 2. But here we finally are going to get into the, what do you got to say?
Eliphaz was the first to address Job. Will you indeed, Job, a king, equal in rank with ourselves? And when Job said, Aye, they broke out into lamentations and bitter tears, and all together they sang an elegy. The armies of the three kings, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, joined in the choir. Again, Eliphaz began to speak, and he bemoaned Job's sad fortune and depicted his friend's former glory, adding the refrain to each sentence, whither has departed the splendor of your throne? After listening along to the wailing and lamenting of Eliphaz and his companions, Job spoke, saying, Silence, and I will show you my throne and the splendor of its glory. Kings will perish, rulers disappear, their pride and luster will pass like a shadow across a mirror, but my kingdom will persist forever and ever, for glory and magnificence are in the chariot of my Father.
Wow. So that's a pretty powerful line that Job says back to his friends. You know, it's your ego, it's your own pride, right? You know, you think that things last forever, nothing lasts forever. People are so focused on what you have in the moment.
These words aroused the wrath of Eliphaz, and he called upon his associates to abandon Job to his fate and go their way. But Bildad appeased his anger, reminding him that some allowance ought to be made for one so sorely tried as Job. Bildad put a number of questions to the sufferer in order to establish his sanity. He wanted to elicit from Job how it came about that God, upon whom he continued to set his hopes, could inflict such dire suffering. Not even a king of flesh and blood would allow a guardsman of his that had served him loyally to come to grief. Bildad desired to have information from Job also concerning the movements of the heavenly bodies. Job had but one answer to make to these questions. Man cannot comprehend divine wisdom, whether it reveal itself in inanimate and brute nature or in relation to human beings. But, continued Job, to prove to you that I am in my right mind, listen to the question I shall put to you. Solid foods and liquids combine inside of man, and they separate again when they leave his body. Who effects the separation? And when Bildad conceded that he could not answer the question, Job said, if you cannot comprehend the changes in your body, how can you hope to comprehend the movements of the planets?
Interesting. It's kind of a weird answer of, you don't understand the human body, so why would you understand the universe? That's an interesting analogy. You put everything in your body and it all comes out the way it comes out. Who knows? Who understands that? Now, of course, now we do know a lot about it. Obviously, it doesn't always help us in what we eat, but it is an interesting analogy, or it's an interesting way that's set up. But again, we don't understand our bodies. How do you expect to understand the universe? You can make the same argument today, even though we know a lot more about both. There's still a lot we don't know. And again, this is kind of, again, the answer, God knows, right?
Zophar, after Job had spoken thus to Bildad, was convinced that his suffering had had no effect upon his mind. And he asked him whether he would permit himself to be treated by the physicians of the three kings, his friends. But Job rejected the offer, saying, my healing and my restoration come from God, the creator of all physicians.
Wow. That's pretty wild, which is, I don't need your doctors. I don't need your stinking doctors. I've got God. Well, seeing as how he knew that the stuff was coming from God, maybe it wasn't as anti-scientific as we would think. And again, you don't have to get political right now, but there are people who are saying this even today. Healing comes from God. Judaism rejects that kind of answer. However, again, this does seem to be an unusual situation, not your normal illness. And here we go.
While the three kings were conversing thus with Job, his wife Zitidos made her appearance clad in rags, and she threw herself at the feet of her husband's friends, and amid tears she spoke, saying, "O Eliphaz and your other friends of Job, remember what I was in other days, and how I am now changed, coming before you in rags and tatters." The sight of the unhappy woman touched them so deeply that they could only weep, and not a word could they force out of their mouths. Eliphaz, however, took his royal mantle of purple and laid it about the shoulders of the poor woman. Zitidos asked only one favor, that the three kings should order their soldiers to clear away the ruins of the building under which her children lay entombed, that she might give their remains decent burial. The command was issued to the soldiers accordingly, but Job said, "Do not put yourselves to trouble for naught. My children will not be found, for they are safely bestowed with their Lord and Creator." Again, his friends were sure that Job was bereft of his senses. He rose, however, prayed to God, and at the end of his devotions, he bade his friends look eastward. And when they did his bidding, they beheld his children next to the ruler of heaven with crowns of glory upon their heads. Zitidos prostrated herself and said, "Now I know that my memorial resides with the Lord." And she returned to the house of her master, whence she had absented herself for some time against his will. He had forbidden her to leave it, because he had feared that the three kings would take her with them. In the evening, she lay down to sleep next to the manager for the cattle, but she never rose again. She died there of exhaustion. The people of the city made great mourning for her, and the elegy composed in her honor was set down in writing and recorded.
Wow. So there you have a version of what happens to Job's wife. I don't know where the Zitidos origin, which Midrash Ginsburg found that in. I'm not sure. I've never seen it. It's not in a Jewish text, I'm not saying in a Hebrew text or Aramaic text. Zitidos is clearly a Greek name, but I don't believe it was only a Christian source. But this is an interesting idea that she does get it, but she dies anyways. She dies of exhaustion. But she does know that it's all going to be okay. But by the time she does, it's too much. It's already been too much for her. But not a happy ending, but it's not a sad ending either, I guess. A completely sad ending. All right, folks, we're going to finish with this last section, which I didn't want to say we rushed through it, but it would have been a kind of a weird place just to read this one section of Job, because we are coming to a whole different thing next week. We're going to read about a little bit about Moses' birth next week, which is so amazing that when you read what's actually in the Midrash about that. But let's finish up with Job and how he gets everything back. Yay, Job. It'll all be okay.
Job restored. More and more of the friends of Job came to the conclusion that he had incurred divine punishment on account of his sins. And as he asseverated his innocence again and again, they prepared angrily to leave him to his fate. Especially Elihu was animated by Satan to speak scurrilous words against Job, upbraiding him for his unshakable confidence in God. Then the Lord appeared to them, first to Job, and revealed to him that Elihu was in the wrong, and his words were inspired by Satan. Next he appeared unto Eliphaz, and to him he spoke thus: "You and your friends, Bildad and Zophar, have committed a sin, for you did not speak the truth concerning my servant Job. Rise up and let him bring a sin offering for you. Only for his sake do I refrain from destroying you."
And the book of Job does end with the friends offering up sacrifices, essentially kind of admitting their mistakes. The three friends, Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar, all seem to kind of be speaking from the traditional mode of, you must have done something wrong, Job. You just don't remember what it is. It's Elihu who takes a different tack with Job. And it says that Elihu was animated by Satan. There are also legends or versions of this that Elihu actually is Satan, who's the one who comes to Job and says, why are you saying this? You know, God does whatever. I mean, Elihu is actually the closest to the truth and kind of is the new voice, if you will. But interestingly, the Midrash takes the tone that he's actually Satan in disguise, or speaking with Satan, encouragement of Satan. But the friends don't get punished because they are Job's friends. Here we go.
God appeared to Job once more, correct? Sorry. The sacrifice offered by Job in behalf of his friends was accepted graciously by God, and Eliphaz spoke out into a hymn of thanksgiving to the Lord for having pardoned the transgression of himself and his two friends. At the same time, he announced the damnation of Elihu, the instrument of Satan. God appeared to...
And again, there it is that Elihu is actually set out separately and is not good, is not a good friend. Again, he's the last person to speak, the last of the four friends. So it's interesting that, and again, some people feel that, who is this Elihu who comes up and kind of speaks differently? He's younger, but we learn that, but that's all we learn about. Here he's kind of like cast as an instrument of Satan. Here we go.
God appeared to Job once more and gave him a girdle composed of 3 ribbons, and he bade him tie it around his waist. Hardly had he put it on when all his pain disappeared. His very recollection of it vanished, and more than this, God made him to see all that ever was and all that shall ever be. After suffering 7-fold pain for 7 years, Job was restored to strength. With his 3 friends, he returned to the city, and the inhabitants made a festival in his honor and unto the glory of God. All his former friends joined him again, and he resumed his old occupation, the care of the poor, for which he obtained the means from the people around him. He said to them, give me each one of you a sheep for the clothing of the poor, and 4 silver or gold drachmas for their other needs. The Lord blessed Job, and in a few days his wealth had increased to double the substance he had owned before misfortune overtook him. Zitidos, having died during the years of his trials, he married a second wife, Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and she bore him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had never had more than 1 wife at a time, for he was wont to say, if it had been intended that Adam should have 10 wives, God would have given them to him. Only 1 wife was bestowed upon him, whereby God indicated that he was to have but 1, and therefore 1 wife suffices for me too.
Again, there's a little message here. Don't go around having too many wives, having more than 1 wife. Nope. If God had wanted you to have more than 1 wife, then God would have given Adam more than 1 wife. Interesting. You can already see, again, this move towards monogamy. Yep.
When Job,
but he marries Dinah, and that's who he has these kids with. Here we go.
When Job, after a long and happy life, felt his end approaching, he gathered his 10 children around him and told them the tale of his days. Having finished the narrative, he admonished them in these words, see, I am about to die, and you will stand in my place. Forsake not the Lord, and be generous toward the poor. Treat the feeble with consideration, and do not marry with the women of the Gentiles.
It's kind of interesting, because if he's a Gentile, what kind of deal is that? I mean, again, now his kids are Jewish because they're Israelite, because they're Dinah's kids, but it's a very strange thing for a Gentile father to say to his kids. Maybe not the only time it's been said.
Thereupon he divided his possessions among his sons, and to his daughters he gave what is more precious than all earthly goods. To each of them 1 ribbon of the celestial girdle he had received from God. The magic virtue of these ribbons was such that no sooner did the possessors tie them around their waists than they were transformed into higher beings, and with seraphic voices they broke out into hymns after the manner of angels. For 3 days, Job lay upon his bed, sick, though not suffering, for the celestial girdle made him proof against pain. On the 4th day, he saw the angels descend to fetch his soul. He arose from his bed, handed a cithern to his oldest daughter, Jemima, day, a censer to the second one, Keziah, perfume, and a cymbal to the third, Amaltheus, horn, and bade them welcome the angels with the sound of music. They played and sang and praised the Lord in the holy tongue. Then he appeared that sits in the great chariot, kissed Job, and rode away, bearing his soul with him eastward. None saw them depart except the 3 daughters of Job. The grief of the people, especially the poor, the widows, and the orphans, was exceeding great. For 3 days they left the corpse unburied because they could not entertain the thought of separating themselves from it. 3 days. As the name of Job will remain imperishable unto all time by reason of the man's piety, so his 3 friends were recompensed by God for their sympathy with him in his distress. Their names were preserved, the punishment of hell was remitted unto them, and best of all, God poured out the Holy Spirit over them. But Satan, the cause of Job's anguish, and the Lord cast down from heaven, for he had been vanquished by Job, who amid his agony had thanked and praised God for all he had done to him.
So this story, at least this last version of this last part of his midrash of what happens to Satan, is that this is how Satan gets thrown out of heaven. You know, it's not the Paradise Lost Milton version of stuff where, you know, Satan, and that's early based on early Christian legends and Jewish legends, that there's an angelic rebellion. Not in this version. In the Jewish version, it's literally this story of Job that gets Satan tossed out of heaven. Because he turned out to be wrong and caused an innocent man to suffer for no reason, that's how Satan got on the wrong side. So it's an interesting understanding of how Satan goes wrong. But it also, of course, you know, plays out, the Job story plays out in a much bigger way to have a much bigger impact on the world. That Satan actually goes to hell because of this. Again, there's lots of different elements here to the story that have to be kind of brought out of the Midrash because they didn't exist at the time that the Torah story was first composed, or we first have it. But later on, people have to deal with their perceptions of who Satan is. I mean, we, even as Jews, we can't separate ourselves from every image of Satan that has been brought to us by Christian theology. So it's very hard for us to read that name Satan without thinking of a devil with horns and, you know, whatever else, which again is why I like the show Lucifer so much, because it goes back to the Jewish versions of Satan, which are, Satan has a job. He may not like the job. It may not be a good job or an easy job, but it's a job. And God entrusted Lucifer with the job because, not because he doesn't like Lucifer, but because he trusts that Lucifer will do the right thing in a bad situation. It's a very Jewish understanding of Satan or Lucifer. And again, they're used interchangeably. Well, they're used that way in the show. But anyways, there's a lot here in the story of Job. I definitely encourage you to read the part that we don't really talk about at all, which is the dialogues over why things happen and why we have to suffer and why we feel that, you know, God must not be paying attention to us. But it's also a good time always to turn to when bad things happen to good people and crack that open if you haven't in a while. It's not a very long book, and it's definitely one of the classics, I would say, of modern Jewish literature, which gives us a sense of, you know, I would say hope and support as we get through life. It's I'll tell you how many pages it is. It's not very long. I want to say it's I don't know how many pages it is, but it's not very long. 176 pages. So well, we hope that nobody suffers this week. That there's no unnecessary or burdensome aspects to your life where you have to say, why me? I hope it's a good week for everybody. And join us tomorrow night for Torah
Game
study.
7.
Lech Lecha. There will be no Game 7, God willing, tomorrow night that we have to compete with for baseball. That's the bigger issue. I don't know how possibly I can focus on it, Torah study, if there's a Game 7. So please, God, don't give us a Game 7. Please, don't do it. I really hope that.
Is that an official
they
prayer,
don't pull a
Mark?
ninth inning blunder again.
Yeah, please, oh gosh.
God, that was just horrible.
That was,
As long as they don't bring in Jensen, we'll be good.
yes. Well, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. Who else pitches tonight? I really wish Bueller was going to close it out and put in May and whoever else, but yeah, we didn't get
They
that.
say May. No, I read that May's going to come in today.
Well, I told you at the beginning, right? I told this to Mike privately that I thought Dustin May might be the hero of this series. He didn't start out that way, but let's hope. So it's not suffering to that level. Again, by the way, it is. We have to remind ourselves it is only sports. And by the way, I was reading an article this morning that the viewership of sports is ridiculously plummeted all across the board. NBA playoffs were 51% down. The NHL was 61% down. Football's even down 12%. Baseball was down like 30%. And I understand it. I mean, it's hard to focus or even think about sports when there's so much else happening.
It's for me. I'm not a big football fan, but I've watched more football this year than I have probably in the last 5 years combined. It's just something to do.
Do they include horse racing in that? Because it seems like a lot of more people are watching all the horse races around the country because they were the first ones to actually be able to do anything.
I will tell you this, actually, since you brought it up, Sandy, what I read is that the Kentucky Derby was down as well. I will tell you that it's a good point.
Well, the Preakness was the best race I've ever seen. I mean, or one of the best. I shouldn't say the best, but that was
quite the horse racing aficionado.
And the female horse won, of course.
I will tell
that's rare.
I will tell you I can't find the article, but yes, it was down. Sports viewership was down across the board, even.
Yeah, they said for the World Series, it's one of the least watched World Series ever.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
The decline in this was they interviewed a guy. Let me just see if I can find this. I don't know. I can't find it. It was basically, they're saying that people are saying it's because of, everybody being so wrapped up in everything else going on. Here it is. Kentucky Derby was down 43%.
Wow.
I didn't watch it because it was on Shabbos, but that's just me. No, I can't. I seriously, I've always wanted.
Oh, but you didn't turn on Saturday's game either, did you, Rabbi?
No, I didn't. No, but wait, it started at like 5, right?
Right, and sundown's not till 6:30.
No, I started it. I started about. I would say it was a little bit before sundown. I was already mad. What are you talking about? Do I need to remind you? I mean, that was, yeah, anyway. So the I didn't see the beginning, but I'm not happy that we're not putting our best pitcher in right now for today. I'd like to end it and why? I mean, it bugs me. It's like, sometimes I think they're doing it for ratings, but they're not, the ratings aren't there. And whatever. I hope that we're this will all be ancient history.
Well, no, everybody's going to be hitting because that's what Robert's going to do. So we're all going to be hitting. So the pitching won't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope from your mouth to God's ear, right?
All right, guys. Everybody be safe in the meantime, and everybody stay healthy. And weekend, we wish Rosemary a quick exit from the hospital, all healthy too. So if you're watching Rosemary from afar, hopefully you're not in ICU anymore. All right, bye everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Beautiful.